What happens when an immovable force of politics, an architect of power who has spent half a century mastering the art of message control, voluntarily steps into a space engineered to dismantle all control? What happens when Washington, D.C., with its cold marble corridors and shielded whispers, collides head-on with the Bravo Clubhouse, a lacquered jewel box filled with hard liquor, impertinent questions, and unforgiving truths? That was the question hanging in the thick New York air on a sweltering Tuesday night. Outside, the city pulsed with its familiar, relentless rhythm. But inside the studios of Watch What Happens Live, a different kind of energy was building. It felt like the static before a lightning strike, a silence pregnant with anticipation. The set, as always, was a tribute to purposeful chaos. Bottles were backlit in a neon grid. The WWHL logo winked with mischief from a brick wall. It was not a place for the faint of heart or for those with secrets to keep. It was an arena disguised as a cocktail party. And tonight, the gladiator stepping into that arena was none other than Nancy Pelosi. Her decision to agree to an interview with Andy Cohen had sent a small earthquake through Washington. It was like the Queen of England announcing she'd be entering a pie-eating contest. It defied all logic, every unwritten rule of power. Political commentators, from Fox News to MSNBC, shared a collective state of disbelief. Pelosi's team had pushed a carefully polished narrative. This was an effort to connect with a new generation of voters, to humanize a figure often seen as aloof and rigid. They wanted to show America a Nancy Pelosi who could laugh, who could talk about frivolities, who could exist outside the political bubble of Capitol Hill. But to the more astute observers, the real reason was far clearer. It was a power move, a calculated gamble. Amid a deeply fractured political landscape, where public faith in institutions was at a historic low, Pelosi needed a jolt. She needed to change the story, to prove she was not a relic of the past, but a still relevant player, unafraid to walk into enemy territory to assert her dominance. She wasn't coming to the clubhouse to make friends. She was coming to conquer. She was coming to show Andy Cohen and his audience that, even on his home turf, the rules were still hers to make. The initial media reaction was a cocktail of curiosity and derision. The right mocked it as a desperate attempt to be hip. The left fretted it was an unnecessary risk, a potential blunder that could undermine her gravitas. Daytime talk shows buzzed about what she would wear, what she would drink, and whether Andy would dare ask her about plastic surgery rumors. The event had become a cultural phenomenon before it even happened, a perfect intersection of hard power and soft entertainment. When Andy Cohen took the stage, he was the picture of relaxed confidence. His grin was dialed to its familiar troublemaking frequency. A cocktail was balanced in his hand like a punctuation mark. The band vamped, the audience whooped, and the cameras slid in for a warm opening kiss. "Good evening," Andy purred, his voice smooth as velvet. "Tonight, we have a very special guest, a woman who has lived more headlines than most of us have had hangovers. Please welcome the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi." The applause rose. Not stadium thunder, not tepid. It was somewhere in between. Curious, almost clinical. Nancy Pelosi strode out, a vision of controlled composure. She wore a power-red pantsuit, impeccably tailored, her brunette hair styled into an impenetrable helmet. Her smile was a masterpiece of political engineering, both warm and distant. She shook Andy's hand like a formality she had long outgrown, flashed a minimalist smile to the room, and slid into the guest chair with an athlete's relaxation and a CEO's entitlement. "It's great to have you here," Andy said, beginning the ritual. Pelosi gave a slight nod. "Thank you for having me, Andrew," she replied, the use of his full name a subtle reminder of status. Andy raised a playful eyebrow. "Oh, we're being formal. Here, you're just Andy." She smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Very well, Andy." The game had begun. They both knew it. The audience may not have, the producers may have only been hoping for a few viral moments, but the two people at the center of the stage knew better. This was not an interview. It was a chess match, played under the glare of hot studio lights. And for the next hour, America would be watching to see who would call checkmate. The first segment of the show unfolded exactly as Pelosi's PR team had scripted it in their sweetest dreams. It was designed to be a sedative, a carefully choreographed performance of charm and relatability. Andy, playing the role of the perfect host, lobbed a series of questions as soft as feather pillows. "Madam Speaker," he began. "First of all, I have to say, that suit is fabulous. Power red. Are you sending a message with that?" Pelosi offered a gracious laugh, a sound honed over thousands of fundraisers. "Oh, Andy, sometimes a suit is just a suit, but I've always believed women should dress to project their strength, not to hide it." A perfect answer. It was humble, yet powerful, yet inspiring. The audience applauded approvingly. Andy continued on. He asked her about her grandchildren, her favorite Italian dish, the last TV show she binge-watched. She answered each question with a mix of grandmotherly grace and politician's precision. She told a humorous anecdote about trying to explain the legislative process to her 7-year-old grandson, who just wanted to know why she couldn't pass a law to have ice cream for dinner every night. The room was filled with laughter. Pelosi appeared to be relaxing. She leaned forward, placing a hand on Andy's knee in a familiar gesture, and the audience was eating it up. "She's so relatable," a woman in the front row whispered to her friend. And that was precisely the intended effect. She was playing her game, and she was winning. Then, Andy brought out his signature party trick. "All right, Madam Speaker. It is time for a round of Plead the Fifth." A cheer of excitement went up from the audience. Pelosi smiled, the smile of someone who knows they're walking into a trap but is supremely confident in their ability to disarm it. "I've been warned about this," she joked. "The rules are simple," Andy explained. "I'm going to ask you 3 personal, slightly cheeky questions. You can refuse to answer one of them by saying, 'I plead the fifth,' but only once. Are you ready?" "More than ready," Pelosi replied, her confidence radiating through the room. Andy picked up his first card. Question 1. Besides your husband, who is the best-looking man in American politics, past or present? A harmless question. Pelosi laughed heartily. "Oh, that's a dangerous one, but I'll answer it. I always thought John F. Kennedy had incredible charisma. A combination of glamour and intellect." She had deftly chosen a beloved icon, an unassailable answer. "An excellent choice," Andy said, picking up his second card. Question number 2. What is the most ridiculous rumor you've ever heard about yourself? Pelosi feigned a moment of thought. "There are so many to choose from. But I think the rumor that I only eat dark chocolate ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner is probably the most ridiculous. I only have it for breakfast and dinner." The room erupted in laughter again. She had taken real criticism about her expensive freezer and turned it into a self-deprecating joke. It was a masterful move. She had neutralized a potential weapon before it could be used against her. Andy laughed along with her. He knew exactly what she was doing. He'd seen it before with media-trained celebrities. They came, they charmed, they controlled. But Andy was a patient man. He was like a fisherman, willing to let his quarry swim a bit to play out the line before he set the hook. He picked up the final card. "All right, Madam Speaker. Last question. You've been in Congress since 1987. You've seen it all. Name one politician you've worked with whom you simply could not stand, who made you want to rip up the carpets in your office." The room went quiet. This question had teeth. Any answer would make headlines. Pelosi smiled, a triumphant smile. "Ah, Andy, you have me cornered. To that question I believe I must say, I plead the fifth." The audience applauded. She had navigated the minefield perfectly. She had played along, she had been a good sport, and she had given away nothing. She had shown Andy that she could play his game and still control the board. As the show cut to commercial, Pelosi sat back, a look of satisfaction on her face. She believed the hardest part was over. She had built goodwill. She had shown her human side. Now, she could coast through the rest of the interview. But she had made a fatal mistake. She had underestimated her opponent. She thought Andy Cohen was just an entertainment host. She didn't realize that, behind the dazzling smile and frivolous questions, was one of the sharpest interviewers on television. Andy wasn't interested in her polished answers. He was looking for the cracks, and he was about to start swinging a sledgehammer. The prelude was over. When the studio lights came back up, there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Andy's smile was still in place, but it seemed a little sharper around the edges. The easy warmth of the first segment had evaporated, replaced by a cool focus. "Welcome back to Watch What Happens Live," Andy said, his voice still smooth. "We're here with Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, and Madam Speaker, I'd like to shift to something a bit more serious, if you don't mind." Pelosi nodded, her own smile becoming more fixed. She sensed the change. "Of course, Andy." "Great," Andy said, setting his cocktail down on the table. "There's been a lot of talk recently about congressional stock trading. You're a very wealthy woman, and your husband, Paul, is an incredibly successful investor. Some people feel it's unfair that lawmakers, who have inside information on the industries they regulate, can trade stocks in those same industries. What are your thoughts on that?" The question was posed reasonably, almost academically, but it was a disguised bomb. Pelosi shifted into politician mode. "Andy, I couldn't agree more that we need transparency and accountability. That's why I was a strong supporter of the Stock Act. We follow the law and the rules scrupulously. It was the stock answer. A brick wall of political jargon designed to stop any attack in its tracks. Any journalist in Washington would have nodded and moved on to the next question. But this wasn't Washington." Andy leaned forward, a look of faux sympathy on his face. "Oh, I get the rules, but let's talk about the feel of it. For the average person watching at home, someone who might be struggling to pay their rent, when they see the speaker's husband make millions on tech stocks right before the House passes a bill that benefits the tech industry, it doesn't look right. It smells a little fishy." The use of the word fishy was a deliberate jab. It was the language of the Real Housewives, not Meet the Press. A flash of annoyance crossed Pelosi's face. "My husband has never made an investment decision based on any information he received from me, and to imply otherwise is insulting." "No one's implying anything," Andy said, his voice a caricature of innocence. "We're just asking questions, like, is it some kind of seventh sense, a power couple sense? Can he just feel the legislative winds shifting through, political osmosis?" A few audience members chuckled. The satire was venomous. Andy was turning a complex political issue into a reality show storyline. Pelosi was not amused. "This is a trivialization of a serious issue, and it's a tactic that has been used by my opponents for years to try and undermine me." "But, Madam Speaker, is it an unfair criticism?" Andy pressed. "Because, honestly, to a lot of people, it looks like there's one set of rules for people like you and another set for everyone else. Like you guys have some kind of immunity coupon we don't get. Do you have a coupon sense? Do you just know when a stock is about to go on sale?" The coupon analogy was an insult. It was designed to get under her skin, to break her composure, and it was starting to work. Two small spots of red appeared on Pelosi's cheeks. "Andy," she said, her voice like ice, "I have spent my entire career fighting for ordinary people. To try and paint me as someone who is out of touch is a gross mischaracterization of who I am." "But perception is reality, isn't it?" Andy countered. "And the perception is that you're playing a game that most Americans don't even know the rules to. You can say it's all legal, but that doesn't mean it's right. It's like when Erica Jane said she had no idea where Tom was getting the money. It might technically be true, but does it feel right?" The Erica Jane reference was a punch to the gut. Andy had officially dragged the Speaker of the House into the Bravo universe. He had compared her to a reality star accused of being complicit in her husband's financial crimes. For a moment, Pelosi looked utterly stunned. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She had never faced this kind of questioning before. It wasn't based on facts or policy. It was based on feelings, perception, and pop culture analogies. It was a language she was not accustomed to speaking. "I think," she began, her voice trembling slightly with anger, "that we should move on to another topic." Andy smiled, the smile of a shark that smells blood in the water. "Of course, Madam Speaker, we can move on." But they both knew. A crack had appeared in her armor. Andy had found a weak spot, and he was not going to let it go. He had shown her that, in his clubhouse, the rules of Washington didn't apply. Here, the truth was less important than a good storyline. And he had just cast Nancy Pelosi as the lead in his latest drama. Andy let the awkward silence hang in the air for a few beats, savoring Pelosi's discomfort. Then he moved in, his voice laced with a false sympathy. "You know, Madam Speaker, speaking of perception and being out of touch, there was another moment I wanted to ask you about. It happened early in the pandemic." Pelosi narrowed her eyes. She knew what was coming. "You were doing a television interview from your kitchen," Andy continued, painting the picture. "And you decided to show all of America your 24-0 Sub-Zero freezer, packed to the brim with gourmet ice cream. Meanwhile, millions of Americans were losing their jobs. They were in line at food banks. They were terrified." He paused for effect. For many people, that moment, it felt like a Marie Antoinette moment. Let them eat ice cream. Do you regret it? If the stock question was a jab, this was a haymaker. It was the most personal, most potent criticism leveled against Pelosi. An accusation that she was an elite so insulated she couldn't comprehend the suffering of the people she claimed to represent. Pelosi's composure finally shattered. "That was a disgusting political hit job," she said, her voice rising. That moment was taken out of context by the opposition and weaponized to create a false narrative. "I was in my home. I was not showing off. And I find it reprehensible that you would bring it up here. But it worked, didn't it?" Andy shot back. "It landed because it tapped into a bigger truth. That there is a profound disconnect between the people in Washington and the rest of the country. Do you think Congress in general has become like a season of The Real Housewives? A bunch of rich people arguing over things that don't really affect their lives, while regular people just watch and shake their heads." A gasp went through the studio audience. Some people laughed, some audibly gasped. The comparison was both brilliant and brutal. Pelosi was on her feet. "That is insulting. Insulting to me and insulting to the institution I serve." "But is it true?" Andy pressed, undeterred. "You fight on Twitter. You call each other names. You go to lavish dinner parties and then vote on laws that affect millions. How is that different from Lisa Vanderpump and Kyle Richards fighting over a story on Radar Online?" "How dare you?" Pelosi shouted, her rage now completely undisguised. "We are dealing with matters of life and death. War, peace, healthcare, the future of our planet. And you're comparing it to some vapid reality show?" "My show might be vapid," Andy retorted, his own voice rising. "But at least it's honest about what it is. It doesn't pretend to be some noble calling. And I'll tell you this, my housewives are at least honest about how rich and out of touch they are. They don't try to pretend they're of the people while flying home on private jets." It was a direct hit, an accusation of hypocrisy. Pelosi looked as if she might explode. She pointed a finger at Andy. "You know nothing about me. You know nothing about sacrifice. You sit there in your designer suit, on your plush sofa, and pass judgment on people who are actually trying to make the world a better place. You are the embodiment of everything that is wrong with our culture. Shallow, celebrity-obsessed, and completely hollow." The interview had completely disintegrated. It had become a personal screaming match. The veneer of civility had been stripped away, revealing the raw contempt underneath. The audience sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting back and forth between the two combatants as if watching a tennis match. Andy, rather than being offended, seemed to be reveling in it. He had gotten what he wanted. He had poked the bear. He had stripped away the politician's mask and revealed the angry, prideful person beneath. "See?" he said to the audience, spreading his hands. "I told you. Just like a reunion show. Lots of screaming, lots of pointing fingers, and nothing actually gets resolved." Pelosi looked at him with pure hatred. If looks could kill, Andy Cohen would have been a pile of ash on the floor. She knew she had fallen into his trap. She had let him provoke her. She had lost control. And on live television, losing control is death. It didn't seem possible for things to get worse. But Andy Cohen wasn't done. He had one more card to play, the most dangerous one in his deck. He let the tension settle for a second, then looked directly at Pelosi, his expression turning deadly serious. "Madam Speaker, I want to ask you about January 6th. The mention of that day sucked the air out of the room." Pelosi's face hardened into a mask of solemnity. "It was a tragic day in our history, an attack on our democracy." "Completely agree," Andy said, "but I want to ask a difficult question. When you look back at the years leading up to January 6th, the polarization, the hostile language, the division, do you feel any personal responsibility for creating an environment where something like that could happen? If the ice cream freezer question was a grenade, this was a nuclear bomb. It was the ultimate accusation in American politics, the charge that one had contributed to the very fracturing of the nation." Pelosi looked at him as if he had just desecrated something sacred. "That is the most offensive question I have ever been asked in my entire career," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "There is one person responsible for January 6th, and that is Donald Trump. To try and assign blame to anyone else is a distortion of history and an insult to the police officers who defended the Capitol that day." "I'm not assigning blame," Andy said, his voice dangerously calm. "I'm asking about responsibility. For years, you called your opponents enemies of the state. You tore up the president's State of the Union address on national television. You said Republicans wanted to put Americans back in chains. That kind of language has consequences. Don't you think you also played a part in turning politics into a zero-sum war?" "I was fighting for what I believe in," Pelosi yelled, her composure completely gone. "I was fighting against an existential threat to our republic, and I will not apologize for it." "But did your fight sometimes become too personal?" Andy was bored. "Did it become more about beating the other side rather than finding common ground? Did you become the very thing you claim to despise?" It was a kill shot. The accusation that, in her fight against the monster, she had become a monster herself. Pelosi looked like she had been slapped. For a moment, she was utterly silent. Her entire career, her entire legacy, was being challenged on a late-night entertainment show by a man who made a living asking rich women about their feuds. The absurdity of the situation seemed to overwhelm her. And then, something inside her broke. "I'm done," she said, her voice small and sharp. She shot to her feet, all grace gone, leaving only raw fury. Andy stood up too. "Madam Speaker, you can't just walk out." "Oh, I can," she said. She unclipped the microphone from her lapel. "This is not an interview. This is a public execution, and I will not participate in it any longer." She threw the microphone down on the chair. The small sound echoed through the silent studio like a gunshot. "You came here to show you were one of the people," Andy said, his voice now tinged with a genuine sadness. "But all you've shown is that you can't handle a single question you don't control. You wanted to prove you were relatable, but you proved you're the biggest drama queen in America." Without another word, Pelosi turned on her heel and strode off the stage. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving a stunned silence and the image of an empty chair. The cameras kept rolling. They focused on Andy's face as he stared at the door that had just closed. Then they panned across the audience, who sat with their mouths agape, trying to process what they had just witnessed. They had come for a TV show. Instead, they had witnessed a political implosion in real time. They had seen one of the most powerful women in the world be defeated, not by a political rival, but by the rules of reality television. In the digital world, there is no lag time. Before Andy Cohen could even cut to the final commercial break, the clip of Pelosi throwing her mic and storming off the set had gone supernova. It was a digital virus, spreading from phone to phone, screen to screen. Pelosi Meltdown and Andy the Giant Slayer were the #1 trending topics worldwide. Newsrooms across the country descended into chaos. Producers screamed, journalists typed frantically. This was the kind of story that made careers. It had everything: power, pride, conflict, and an indelible, unscripted moment of live television. The reaction, predictably, was split cleanly along partisan lines. The left and the mainstream media rallied to Pelosi's defense. They called Andy's interview an ambush. a shameful display of tabloid journalism. They accused him of being sexist, arguing he would never have dared to question a powerful male politician in that manner. They praised Pelosi for standing up to a bully and refusing to participate in his circus. They painted her as a victim, a stateswoman unjustly attacked by a shallow entertainment host. The right, conversely, canonized Andy Cohen as a folk hero. They called him the only real journalist in America. They praised him for daring to speak truth to power and exposing the real Nancy Pelosi. They saw her walk off as proof of her arrogance, an admission of guilt. Memes spread like wildfire. Pelosi photoshopped as Marie Antoinette, Andy's face superimposed on the body of David battling Goliath. The late-night talk shows had a field day. Stephen Colbert joked that Nancy Pelosi left the clubhouse faster than a Real Housewives star accused of fraud. Jimmy Fallon performed a sketch where he, as Andy Cohen, tried to interview other difficult historical figures, like Genghis Khan and Caligula. The confrontation transcended a simple news moment. It became a Rorschach test for America. What you saw in that exchange depended entirely on your pre-existing political views. Did you see a powerful woman being unfairly attacked by an impertinent man? Or did you see an arrogant politician finally being held accountable? As his show wrapped, Andy sat alone on set, the camera still on him. He looked tired, but also resolute. He looked directly into the lens, as if speaking to every single viewer individually. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice low and serious. "Tonight, we tried to have a conversation. It obviously did not go as planned. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe the speaker wasn't prepared for these kinds of questions. There will be a lot of blame to go around." He paused, picking up his cocktail and looking into it. "But here's what I know. Faith in our leaders is at an all-time low. And part of the reason is that we feel like they don't live in the same reality as us. They speak a different language. They play by a different set of rules. Nancy Pelosi came here tonight to try and bridge that gap. She wanted to show us she was a regular person. But maybe, just maybe, what she really showed is that she's been in the bubble for so long, she doesn't know how to talk to anyone outside of it anymore." He took a sip. "She wanted to prove she was relatable, but in the end, she proved she was the biggest drama queen in America. And here in the clubhouse, we always have room for a queen. Good night, and see you tomorrow." The theme music swelled, the lights faded, but the media storm he had unleashed was only just beginning. The showdown between Nancy Pelosi and Andy Cohen would be remembered not just as a shocking TV moment, but as a defining one. A moment when the wall between politics and entertainment finally came crumbling down, leaving a chaotic mess for the entire country to behold.